Well, first off, let me state a public apology for whoever I just offended by wearing this Alabama shirt. I am sorry. I'm wrong. You're right. I should not be wearing this. So whoever I offended, I'm sorry. Whoever I supported, roll tide. With that said, welcome back to Community Group. We are continuing our highlight sermon series, and so that led us to the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, mainly verses 5 through 8. That coffee mug verse, trust in the Lord with all your heart, do not lean on your own understanding. And so we wanted to dive into what it means to actually trust in the Lord. And so when we get to the book of Proverbs, I have to understand that this is wisdom literature. And then maybe you're asking why I thought every book of the Bible is wisdom. And you're true. But the reason why it's categorized as wisdom literature is because one, it reflects on the world God has made. And two, it reflects on human rhythms and patterns. And so that's why we call it wisdom literature. And so where we are in the book of Proverbs, Solomon is a dad and he's writing to his son and he wants to wish his son well. And so essentially what Solomon is trying to communicate to his son is to fall in love with wisdom like you would a good spouse. And that is the heart of what the book of Proverbs is about. And so that leads to our main point of what we talked about last week was following wisdom. It's not a course of actions in hopes that you retain a habit. Following wisdom is following a person where your life is rescued and preserved. And so we talked about just the heart of Proverbs you can probably find in just these few verses. And the first thing that we needed to understand was what this trust is. And I think it folds out in 3 different points. And so trust in the Lord with all your heart. Now that's a lot easier said than done, right? Like we can talk about a community group. It's easy when we're in church, but when life gets tough, it's so hard for us to trust in God completely. And so usually mistrust is usually fixated on circumstances rather than the goodness of who God is. And so the problem with a lot of us is that we want to treat the Proverbs as like the gospel when it's not. So Proverbs says, if I do A, I get B. And so for a lot of us, we say, Lord, I was faithful with X. Now where is my Y and Z? And so here's the thing that we have to understand is that since it's wisdom literature, this just means that these are wise men observing life and telling you how things normally go. And so these aren't God's law. This is God's word, but not God's law. So we can't expect point A to get us to point B every time. It's usually what happens generally. And so with that, we have to understand that life isn't just pinpoint, if I do this, I get this kind of outcome. And so in all of us, that creates a desire that we need help in trusting the Lord. And that leads us to our second point of what trust is. Trusting the Lord is actually rescuing you from yourself. And that's one of the most beautiful things that the gospel can actually do. I love faithful examples of what this looks like when it makes no sense to trust God in a situation, but people did. You see it with Abraham trusting God in the sacrifice of Isaac, and he eventually spared Isaac because Abraham was faithful. You look at Daniel chapter 3 at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they were about to be executed because they refused to bow down to anybody other than Yahweh God. And I love the example that they set before us where they say, King Nebuchadnezzar, we won't worship you. We won't worship any false gods because we believe there is one true God and he is able to save us. He can save us. He will save us. But even if he doesn't, he's still good and worthy to be trusted. And that should stir up affection in us to let us see that there's no plan B if we are trusting God completely with our lives. And that brings us to what that verse says and what it looks like to fear the Lord. To fear the Lord allows us to let go of our God complex where we have to run everything in our lives. And when we let go of that, we're able to live a lot freer. We're able to live without a lot more stress in our lives. We can put things in perspective that God doesn't give us God-sized problems because he handles those types of problems for us. And so what Proverbs is for Christians, it's a rescue mission. Not just from the outside evils of the world, not just from Satan, but it's a rescue mission from ourselves. Because here's the thing, the greatest danger is not outside of us, It is inside of us. And so the heart of the problem is the problem of my heart. And when I submit that to the Lord and I trust in Him, when I'm trusting in God completely, I can live in the way that I'm intended to live, not in fear, not in worry, if I'm trusting in a good God. And that leads us to our last point of the night was trust in a person, not a virtue. I think it's, if you were not a Christian and you lived your life by the book of Proverbs, you would probably live a good life. There would be some things that weren't in the forecast of the book of Proverbs that would happen to you, but generally you would live a good life because that book has helped to preserve us. But here's the thing, I think you can make the argument that anytime you see wisdom talking in the book of Proverbs, you are actually listening to the words of Jesus echoing. And I think the New Testament scholars and the New Testament writers realize that. And so we have wisdom as a person, and it was Jesus. And so you and I, we trust in the source of wisdom, who is Christ. In a world that's trying to give you wisdom from every aspect, every different religion, every social media influencer, even P.F. Chang's is trying to give you wisdom through a fortune cookie. And so in a world of mistrust, we get to trust in the source of who wisdom is, and that is Jesus. So I hope that you have fun tonight, guys, and I hope that this leads to good conversation, and we'll see you next week.